You're watching Taste the Victory.
The mascots of a franchise are invaluable to the marketing of a series and do so much to attract new potential viewers, customers, or players depending on the franchise. Usually, a cute little guy to get people in the door is as far as you're concerned when designing a mascot, but things get kind of interesting in the world of licensed tie-in games. Often, the franchise mascot may be playable in these games and it suddenly becomes a balancing act. How much is too much and how little is too little, making the mascot appear neglected? Does that even matter? A lot of people just want to look at their cute little guy knowing he's in the game. If our little guy is overrepresented or busted to the point of being toxic, are we creating a subset of the player base that hates him and potentially creating an uncomfortable environment for more casual fans when they try to check out these scenes as big fans of the mascot character? It's an interesting scenario, and I think the following 3 games have approached it in such different ways that it becomes fun to break it down for each game. So today, we're looking at the level of support and how good each mascot character is in the competitive card games of Digimon, Yu-Gi-Oh, and Pokemon. For Pokemon, there is an important distinction to make between their mascot in the video games and the card games, so for the purposes of this video, we will be focusing on just Pokemon's card game. Digimon is the newest card game featured out of the 3 games in this video today. Debuting in 2020 during the COVID pandemic, the game now has 22 booster pack expansions when you include main booster sets, side sets, and bonus sets like the reprint Rising Wind set and their Ghost Game set. It exploded onto the scene with 512-person capped webcam regional events selling out in literal minutes. While things have gotten to a more reasonable level now, it's still a popular game with regularly 400 plus people entering the 512 capped webcam regional tournaments and some in-person regionals. Based on the anime it ties into, the franchise's mascots are usually the Agumon line and Omnimon. The Gabumon line is also pretty often used as a mascot, but it is absolutely 1B to Agumon's 1A. Promotional material can vary depending on the season, as Guilmon and Terriermon are also incredibly popular Digimon, but if you show any group of random people all these Digimon, Agumon is likely the one to be most recognized. So how has that translated into the card game so far? For the purposes of this video, we will be counting variations of the mascots like Toy Agumon and Shio Greymon, since people react just about the same to these cards as if they were traditional Agumon line cards. As of late 2023, there are 38 Agumon cards, including all of his variations, 25 Greymon cards, specifically the champion, 20 Metal Greymon cards, and 18 War Greymon cards, including Black War Greymon and Gaiomon. With these many cards for the mascot released in the span of 3 years, you need to find time to space out these releases. Well, every set has included some variation of a Greymon line except for all of about 5. X2, which is Tamers themed, X3 technically as it only has one Agumon in it and not the whole line, BT15, which is focused on the Great Demon Lords and Digimon Seekers, although there is an alternate art reprint of a Metal Greymon in there, X5, and the Made to Order Ghost Game set. Of the 22 booster sets, only 5 did not feature some kind of Greymon line. To be fair, some of these, like BT10, only feature alternate variations of the line like the Blue Flare version from Digimon Cross Wars, which play very differently and are very visually different than regular Greymon. But on the other side of the coin, BT11 through BT13 features quite a heavy amount of Greymon, with BT12 even including 2 full separate Greymon lines in yellow and red and black since it was the anime protagonist crossover set, and another full Agumon line in BT14 to introduce the new blast mechanic in the set. This was all a lot in a row, but with all the support, does any of it add up to being good? With the first few Greymon line cards introduced in the early game, while they were good and usable, they weren't Greymon decks per se. A lot of the early Digimon card game was good stuff piles for each color. Shine Greymon in BT2 for Japan, 1.5 for us, was the only real dedicated Greymon deck doing very well in a format with the new Shine Greymon cards introduced in that set. This trend of Greymon cards performing well as the payoff or tool of a deck, but not a dedicated deck built around Greymon only, would continue for a few sets. BT4 brings us our first attempt at a Greymon tribal line, but with the Hybrid Season 4 Agunimon line, so technically, to be fair, the Greymon level 4 in this line isn't actually supposed to be a Greymon. It's called Vitromon in the Japanese dub. But the ancient Greymon is, and the entire line is playing off of the nostalgia of Season 1. This deck gets better, but there wasn't anything to write home about it in its introductory set anyways. Yellow and green were running the BT4 format. BT5 introduces some of the most important low end for Greymon decks with the level 2s through level 4s. These can commonly be found in many Greymon deck builds to this day. Again though, Greymon did not see much success in this format. Lord Nightmon and Rookie Rush were running BT5 as they were way too good at breaking your board or way too fast respectively for Red to keep up. The top end introduced for Red here wasn't anything too impressive either. So far, we see kind of a familiar story to longtime card game players. Lots of support to the mascot and it's all fine, but it's not enough to see success. So your favorite is playable but kind of mediocre. But BT15 set an important groundwork for Greymon that will keep being expanded upon. BT6 is where we really start to get traditional Greymon tribal, and it just keeps ramping up from there, not letting up. BT6 introduces the Agumon Bond deck as a representation of the movie Last Kizuna. The gimmick of this deck is Agumon warping with his tamer Tai to a level 7 earlier than most decks would be able to at this point of the game. While not introducing entire new lines, this was a gimmick only given to the two main characters, Agumon and Gabumon, because of their status as series mascots. While Agumon Bond was above average, it didn't really have too much of an impact on the meta it was introduced in, mainly because of the other mascot we haven't spoken of too much yet, Gabumon. Using similar conditions to how we counted Agumon, Gabumon has 16 cards, 13 Garurumons, 15 Rare Garurumon, and 13 Meta Garurumon cards. Overall, the Gabumon line has less cards, but we'll see it ends up having about as much meta impact if not more. Gabumon Bond could bounce multiple level 5 and lower Digimon and on average could restand up to 3 times in one attack. This let it put huge pressure on your opponent while decimating their board, making it the best deck at the time. Skipping ahead, Booster Set 8 introduces groundwork for Blackware Greymon versions of Greymon decks. BT9 is where the modern day decks for these mascots was really finalized. This set introduced the X antibody forms which let Digimon digivolve over monsters of the same level for free or cheap. Greymon and Garurumon turn into OTK decks here, decks that could defeat you on one turn. Garurumon started using old promos introduced all the way in the first set of the game to get additional draws for free when attacking to fuel the 8 or more cards in hand requirements on many of the BT9 cards, and to OTK with the restand and security attack +1 on the Wear Garurumon promo. Garurumon starts becoming one of the best decks in the game with the X antibody and Garurumon promos from here. BT10 comes along with not too much news for the mascots other than Metal Garurumon still being a monster of a deck because of its X antibody cards. BT11 introduces some of the most important cards for Greymon with the Virus Greymon X line, now making it a strong meta deck because of the Virus Greymon X letting you go into cards that normally cost way more for only 1 memory, all while having protection and destroying your opponent's board. BT12 not only introduces further support for the Greymon decks, it also introduces a new line for Shine Greymon. Garurumon X antibody was also still destroying people this whole time, so it also got hit on the balance around this time for being too good since BT9, almost a whole year later. Blackware Greymon now becomes one of the best decks in the format and usually hovers around there to this day, while Shine Greymon ends up getting 2 more sets in a row of support, making it the best deck in the format at the time of Booster Set 13. And in Japan, Booster Set X5 has introduced new Garurumon X cards that have once again made Garurumon an insane deck and basically made up for the loss of the Wear Garurumon promos. While the mascots of Digimon didn't start off too hot in the game, at one point they just kept getting more and more support, keeping them in the top deck spots. While it makes sense for your most important characters to actually be viable and thus often visible in the card game, it has led to a little backlash. In groups, you can commonly see posts referring to the game as Greymon card game or Garurumon card game due to not only these decks being good, but the frequency of new support they get in a row when they're already good. It's a difficult tightrope to walk as you want these mascots ever present for the casual consumer who only recognizes them, but with hundreds of cards needed per booster set expansion, you have an opportunity to create new fan favorites among this subset of Digimon fans, like Grandis Kuwagamon and Psychomon have become. With only one Grandis Kuwagamon to Greymon's 100s, however, it has led to a bit of frustration from the vocal player base online. Every other month, the player base will claim the sky is falling and the game is failing despite record sales and consistent sales momentum, with the homogenization of top decks around the mascot characters being cited as one of, but not their only, frustration. An interesting observation to be made from actually making your mascot viable and pushing them a lot. Next up, let's move to Yugioh. The 2 most iconic mascot monsters in the series are without a doubt Yugi and Kaiba's aces, the Dark Magician and the Blue Eyes White Dragon. Although you can make a very good argument that Dark Magician Girl and Exodia are more iconic, but with Season 1 nostalgia so commonly used in the marketing and Yugi and Kaiba being ever present in that marketing, we'll go with their 2 monsters.
Once you have the most powerful monster, you're ready to be a true champion. Get the power.
Playtime is over!
The power of the cards.
It's time to duel!
Blue Eyes currently has a meme associated with Master Duel of being the deck your friend that grew out of Yu-Gi-Oh! Builds to play Master Duel and gets hard stuck in silver with, which should set the scene for this section of the video. These 2 monsters have existed since the very beginning of the game, but while there were cards that named them and synergized with them, neither really existed as a standalone deck until a decade later when they got direct support. The representation between the paper game and something like Duel Links is pretty different too, so for this video we'll just be looking at the history of the physical game. Yu-Gi-Oh! In its beginning stages was just biggest stats, easy to summon monsters with a bunch of trap and spell removal or draw power. So you could theoretically fit your favorite of these in your decks and do fine at anything besides the highest level. Dark Magician has even seen some success in Team Samurai X X's sealed Dual Knights format, but that's a sealed and casual format. As things went on, however, this became less and less realistic to do thanks to the nature of power creep. Dark Magician became outclassed almost immediately once Summon Scald came out, which had the same attack but required one less tribute. Throughout the years, additional cards did come out steadily that supported Dark Magician, but they were all mediocre or just outclassed by generic cards, and they didn't really do anything at all to change Dark Magician's status. Instead, stuff like Dark Magician and Chaos would be abused by anything other than Dark Magician to break the game. Skipping ahead all the way to 2014, we get to the groundwork for what Dark Magician archetype would play as for a bit in Dragon of Legend. Eye of Timaeus is a spell card that helps Dark Magician get out fusion monsters for a material less, and Amulet Dragon is the intended payoff in the set. Dark Magician was still doing absolutely nothing when these cards were introduced, and they get power creeped out pretty quickly, but they're important to the history of Dark Magician to mention. In 2016, Dark Magician finally gets a lot of support as an archetype in the Dark Illusion set, and a starter deck card that ended up being some of the most important cards in the deck. Magician's Rod finally gives the deck a good normal summon that allows it to search its pieces, including a card introduced in this same set, Dark Magic Circle, which lets the deck draw and banish an opponent's monster every turn. All of this gave Dark Magician the littlest bit of consistency and removal. Later in this same year, the deck gets Eternal Soul, which is arguably the most important card in the deck, making your Dark Magician monsters unaffected by card effects and letting you special summon a Dark Magician. Although it has a pretty brutal drawback, but still, this is so much of what the deck desperately wanted, and once it finally got it, this deck did okay. It was fine. Because of Dark Magic Circle letting it banish something every single turn in addition to the board it can make, the deck was actually playable, and could be taken to okay at best, success at events if you really wanted to. It would be power crept back to a mediocre state pretty quickly though, just due to the nature of Yu-Gi-Oh's releases. A few years later, in 2020, the game saw the release of Red Eyes Black Dragoon. This card did just about everything, and for a small period, the meta was basically focused around how fast can I get this guy out. Dark Magician is a mandatory material on this fusion summon, so it kinda made the card relevant to a bunch of decks that would otherwise never run Dark Magician, so it saw play. Unfortunately, the second anything else was figured out to summon Dragoon quicker, or more power creep was introduced, Dark Magician was knocked back down to pet deck status at best. The strategy introduced for Dark Magician was just too old to keep up with modern decks. Individual cards now make you a ham sandwich while searching out your key pieces of the deck. So relying on 2016 level cards to search a card that will search a card that will hopefully not get negated so you can maybe make Dragoon doesn't cut it anymore. The deck has just been okay ever since. Blue Eyes follows a very similar story to Dark Magician, except it saw infinitely more success just by the nature of being one of the most popular types in Yu-Gi-Oh!, a dragon. While there were small spots of time where Blue Eyes was playable, as it got great support in cards like Flute of Summoning Dragon in the first Kaiba starter deck and the White Legend of Stone in the 2008 set Crossroads of Chaos, Blue Eyes cards really saw widespread high-level play in Dragon Rulers in 2013, since the White Stone of Legend was one way they could get 2 dragons easily. This was absolutely the broken Dragon Rulers carrying it, but hey, if your fave monster was Blue Eyes, you would be happy you were using it in a busted deck. And then the Dragon Rulers take all the heat instead of your favorite mascot. 2016 was like the second coming of Jesus for people that love Blue Eyes. We got a tie-in movie pack for the Dark Side of Dimensions film, bringing more support for the Blue Eyes White Dragon, and this time, it really helped Blue Eyes stand on its own as a deck. Alternative Dragon is incredible, summoning itself for free, enabling plays, and being able to once per turn destroy an opponent's monster every turn. Enough consistency, while admittedly still bricky to bring out powerful synchros and XYZs, helped bring Blue Eyes competitive success in this season, even going as far as winning Worlds. However, it's important to note that because Worlds brings OCG and TCG players together, which are very different formats, this tournament uses a custom ban list to bridge that gap. And that year, the ban list basically slaughtered every deck and made Blue Eyes the best deck. So while Blue Eyes got to take one of the most prestigious awards a deck could, it was more because everything else was neutered rather than it being broken. Blue Eyes has seen fringe success since then, but mostly has done nothing and is bad. The problem with both of these decks is that they're still relying on strategies from 2016 that don't keep up anymore. In Dark Magician's case, also folding to essentially a mystical space typhoon really puts a ceiling on how far it can go, and Blue Eyes relies a lot on spells like Trade-In that are devastating when negated if you don't have a good follow-up. Yet, we've gone years now with no additional round of good archetype-specific support, unless you count Dragoon, but even that was 2 years ago now. It seems Konami was content giving these mascots their time in the limelight and leaving them as they have been since. It's a much more middle ground approach compared to what we saw for Digimon. These mascots will continuously get support like Digimon ones do, but for whatever reason, outside of the one moment every star aligned for Blue Eyes, they'll never be top tier threats. When MBT took a look at Digimon cards once in a video, he and the comments section even made jokes about, yeah, why wouldn't you want your fan favorites to actually be good?
Yeah, I was gonna say, if this card isn't good, it is a huge mistake on the part of the Digimon devs.
So there is a sentiment of wishing Konami would treat these iconic archetypes better among players, or that it would at least make sense to. But as we saw earlier, it's a fine line to walk before you might make players hate them. There's a subset of the player base in Yu-Gi-Oh! That is already tired of constant dual monsters era pandering, basically the Gen 1 pandering of Yu-Gi-Oh! Just because of how much of it there is, even though that support rarely turns out broken. Imagine if it did? Yu-Gi-Oh! Presents an interesting, neutral middle ground option for our video today. Decks need to exist at every level of the game, and top tier meta decks are not always the best intro to a game. In fact, they're usually a terrible intro with too much going on for someone completely new coming in blind. Dark Magician and Blue Eye staying at the power level they have been make them reasonable decks to start with and give casual new players opportunity to learn with their favorite monsters. While there may be some frustrations from players that wish these decks would be powerful after so many rounds of support, they don't overtake the conversation of Yu-Gi-Oh! And this makes the decks more approachable to the people that would be interested in picking them up in the first place. I mean, at least you guys have playable decks. I'm still waiting for a Beaver Warrior retrain deck. And besides, if Dark Magician or Blue Eye suddenly got broken and expensive, or complicated, what else are new players going to build when installing Master Duel?
To protect the world from devastation.
To unite all people within our nation.
To denounce the evils of truth and love.
To extend our reach to the stars above.
Surrender now or prepare to fight.
There's a new way to battle Pokemon, and it's wireless. Pokemon Fire Red and Pokemon Leaf Green are here, and now you can collect, train, and battle in a whole new way, only for Game Boy Advance, rated E for everyone.
Finally, we get to the last card game we'll be looking at today, Pokemon. By far the most popular franchise in this lineup with the largest casual audience. Their big two mascots are without a doubt Pikachu and Charizard. Pikachu in recent studies has even been more recognizable than crusty old Mick Mouse.
I don't know, what does that mean? What's a Mick Mouse? Mick Mouse!
Pikachu and Charizard have received a lot of cards in the game's over 25 years of history, so in this video we'll only be looking at some of their noteworthy printings. Many of these cards are literally just pack filler and have no purpose other than including the Pokemon in the set, but that will be factored into the final assessment of Pokemon and something I'll touch on later. The closest I've seen a pure Pikachu deck be to viable is with the Raichu level X in 2010. Running the full line, you would turbo energy onto your attacking Raichu and go into Raichu level X to attack twice. The Pikachu from Mysterious Treasures was actually a crucial piece of this deck, using its Pokepower to recover the energy you needed to discard to attack. Calling this deck viable is a bit of a stretch. It worked, but it needed a lot to go right and never saw high placements in any events. But if you wanted a Pikachu deck, this was probably the best shot you ever had. Pikachu has gotten X cards and V cards powering it up over the years, but these are just cute gimmick cards that never saw any real play. But you could build casual decks around them and have fun and like actually win games. The most viable a Pikachu card has been is when it was literally carried by Zekrom with the tag team card. This guy did so much damage it could accelerate energy with the rest of the Pokemon lineup. It would even use a Lowland Raichu as a pivoter and use its GX attack if needed. Funny enough, Charizard and Pikachu kind of mirror the Yu-Gi-Oh! Situation we went over, where the tail is very similar, but Charizard has overall seen way more success. Being a fully evolved Pokemon, it's a lot easier and realistic to create a good strategy for it. Charizard was good since set 1, seeing Fringe play because of its amazing ability, but nowhere near the best deck during this time. Charizard would also go on to have many rare cards printed that were very valuable, but not necessarily viable. It wasn't until the introduction of tag team cards that Charizard started seeing some widespread play. Charizard and Brexen tag team was an okay strategy that would do well at local level and saw some League Cup play and some tops at the Bochum Regional in 2020. Charizard and Reshiram was also a pretty solid tag team card that saw some fringe play. In the current day, Charizard X lowercase is probably the best a Charizard deck has ever been. It's a dark type because of how Terra can change your type in the Scarlet and Violet video games. This deck runs a lot of engines and search to get all its pieces though, since it needs to evolve all the way up to a stage 3 Charizard. While a lot of people were hyped for this deck and it is viable, it has yet to do anything crazy in the competitive scene. Being so recent, that can still change after this video comes out. It has a lot of potential. So, there's few Pikachu and Charizard cards that have seen widespread competitive play, but how many of each were printed? Charizard has 48 cards, and Pikachu has 206 cards printed throughout the history of the Pokemon TCG. Many of Charizard's cards have been the rare, incredibly expensive Chase Alternative Art Secret Rare in its set. While a lot of these may have not been playable, it didn't matter, because that's the badass fire-breathing dragon that you thought was stronger than Mewtwo from your childhood. While the mascots may not see much play competitively, they do get represented in the TCG a lot at some of the highest, most sought-after levels. Pikachu gets some of the cutest alt arts used as promos pretty often as well. They're ever present in the card game. This has led to some frustration in Pokemon's own unique way, as people would like to see other plenty iconic Pokemon get some of this nice art spotlight. Being upset with Game Freak's constant representation of Gen 1 Pokemon and characters is a very common sentiment with within the fanbase too, so much so that a nickname was even coined for it, Gen 1ers. But ultimately, the larger casual fanbase does seem to enjoy this representation of the mascots. Pokemon boxes are opened in mass in chase of the prize cards, and the new Charizard alt arts still maintaining high value, such as the most recent one in the new 151 set, implied the demand hasn't gone down from it being done too much yet. In the search for these alts by consumers that don't play the game, a lot of product is opened, and the non-chase cards are sold to fund more box purchases, bringing down the cost of competitive cards since there's so many on the market due to this. It's a yin and yang cycle, really. Overall in Pokemon, the sentiment of being tired of the mascots and Gen 1 comes from the larger franchise and video games, not just the card game. In terms of actual representation in the competitive TCG, Pokemon is a game where we've seen the mascots have the least success, but it's because they don't need them to be broken. Little Timmy is more than happy pulling Charizard or Pikachu as long as they look cool. So while there's certainly a definable burnout towards Pikachu and Charizard among some fans, it could have been much worse in the TCG. At least he's not getting extra special forums just for being Charizard like in the video games. I think these three games give us a perfect scale of pushing your mascot in a competitive game from not much to the middle ground to arguably too much. There's positives and drawbacks to all three. In Digimon, we see the reaction becoming increasingly negative among the dedicated competitive community, even though the game is still hitting record sales numbers for a brand new TCG when they usually die off after 2 years. It's an important balance to keep though, because who knows how long the people that feel the mascots are oversaturated will keep putting up with it. While in Yu-Gi-Oh, there is some criticism to why the iconic anime decks are never really good, but it's mostly in confusion of why you wouldn't just make your mascots playable after so many rounds of support. Although, there does seem to be a begrudging understanding of why in some cases, some of the tools these decks have would be miserable to face every game if they were playable and popular. And you have other avenues to play the game where these decks have seen more success, like Duel Links. Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh present a more reserved way to go about handling your mascot. When I used to play Yu-Gi-Oh more, this kind of annoyed me as I'd love to use Dark Magician or Blue Eyes as a huge fan of the anime, but casual kitchen top Yu-Gi-Oh is now how I mainly play the game, and I'm glad I can use these decks against friends without a huge power level disparity. Different strokes for different folks and all that. I don't think there's any right or wrong way to go about it until it starts to affect your bottom line, but I just thought it would be fun to see how widely these iconic monster partner franchises differ on this point. Thanks for watching and I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think of how each of these games handle their mascots and if you think anything needs to change or it's fine as is. I hope you enjoyed the video because I had a lot of fun researching and making it. Many thanks to One Trick Dragon for the amazing thumbnail to this video. Consider commissioning them on Twitter. And if you would like to support what I do, I have a TCG player affiliate link in the description below if you buy cards, and if not, I have some merchandise down there. Until the next one, I'll see you. And until then, remember to stay hungry until you get a taste of victory.